Faith is an organizational culture and teamwork specialist dedicated to helping business leaders create values driven, inclusive environments where people belong and can deliver on business and social impact goals. As a Caribbean immigrant and mother of neurodistinct children, she's passionate about inclusion for BIPOC and neurodistinct individuals. With a background in computer engineering and doctoral research in teamwork, Faith uses a systematic, high-touch approach to build strong teams, improve operations, maximize productivity, and increase revenue. She's a published researcher, Amazon best-selling author of Parenting Like a Ninja, and former host of Peak Performing Team podcast. We'll let her tell you about her journey, and we're excited to see how we can take the learning and apply it to where we live, work, and play in today's world. Please welcome Faith Clarke from Faith Clarke Consulting. I can't wait to talk about your lived experience in the professional and the personal space around neurodivergence as well as BIPOC. And what our listeners who are white women over 40 might be able to take away from your learning that we can implement to be an actual advocate and not just a silent observer in those very spaces where we live and work and play on a daily basis.
Cool. It should be a fun conversation.
It should be. Rabbit holes are where we get raw, real, and relatable.
That's
because
lovely.
we all have our canned presentation, and then we have what life looks like when the cameras aren't on, right?
Right.
And it's that part that I want our audience to see is that there's real joy and real labor that never hits the highlight reel. What's it like to live this advocacy life, right?
Yeah.
In these United States.
Oh boy. Do we have the time?
Yes.
I am a curious human, and I'm always curious about other humans. And I think this is, I'm in my 50s. So this is how I've come to realize who I am. But I started out as an engineer, and I started out as a church girl, kind of helping in youth ministry and doing all kinds of related things, and helping develop church leaders while also building computer systems. And it was the parenting journey that kind of led me into more of a how do I want to shape myself so that I can be shaping my kids, which challenged what am I doing with my life and so on. That leads me now to the place of how do I help create a world that my kids would live in a little bit better than I do. And so it started out when they were younger, and I would be advocating for space and place for them. My oldest has autism. And so that beginning of advocacy and the beginning of using the ways that I'd showed up professionally just for the helping of my own son. I remember people saying to me, "Oh, you speak so well." And I was like, well, it's sad for other people who maybe not speak as well to not get what they need. So this beginning of advocacy on behalf of my son then expanded as my kids got older into, well, the world is just inhospitable. And so in my current focus, that's the workplace, but it's really any community of people. How do we as communities really be neighbors? How do we really care? How do we really hold? How do we really love? Because if we're doing that, work wouldn't be this chore that everybody has to recover from and go to therapy about and go to the doctor for and kind of get PT because your back, your shoulder is hurting because you're holding all your stress. Like there's so much harm happening in our workplace that if we actually loved and cared for each other, that wouldn't be the case. And so that's kind of my mission.
That's lovely. And your voice has evolved. I suspect you've done some deconstructing along the way because we start that first half of life living a script we didn't write. And then midlife happens. And we have children who are coming into this world and they're facing things that we thought we would have solved for them by now.
Right.
Oh,
I think that I was born with a contrary voice, I think. But in the early years, I'm a good girl. I follow the rules. I want to avoid the punishment. And so in a lot of ways, I learned how to when to speak the contrary thought, but I both enjoy the acceptance of the people around me, and I really was very concerned that people would care about what I said, but ended up always saying the thing that was contrary to what everybody else was doing. And I think, but the courage to not care as much about what people are saying came with having children. And then the presence of the actual humans in my arms helped me to have the courage to challenge what I even believed about them that I thought. I tell people that you have to grieve the child you thought you were going to have, the one you made up when you were deciding that, oh yeah, whatever it is, and then figure out how to love the child you have. And that's a grieving process and that's a releasing process, and it takes courage. And so when you talk about deconstruction, although I think, the 40s as a great opportunity to deconstruct a whole ton. For me, I think it was happening gradually all along. And so it didn't feel sudden. It felt like a continuum process
Yeah.
over time. Yeah.
And what do you think about the idea that you also have to grieve the mother you thought you were going to be
Well,
to
I'm
that
grieving.
idealized child?
Yeah, I'm grieving that now because my
Yeah.
kids are adults. And I think I constantly grieve that all along. But when kids are younger, and my kids all have variations of in neuroatypicalness. And so there's a way that my parenting has been very hands-on and very deliberate, high advocacy, high attention. And we've built, because we built a real, cluster and community, the three kids and myself. And so as they get older now in their adulthood, it feels like they're taking stark changes from the community building that we did. And so there's a real opportunity, invitation to, I was listening to another podcast you were doing, and that you were talking about just this, the parenting, the mother. If that's all you've been, then there's a reckoning with, well, who am I when my kids are no longer interested in what I have to offer in the way I was offering it. And
Yeah.
then not only that, but who am I as a person who still offers care for adults who have the various challenges that they offer, that they have, that is willing to be persistent in that care in the face of their pushback. And what's the balance there in terms of autonomy? As a Caribbean woman, I note that in the US, ideas around individuality are far different from what I grew up with as a Jamaican. And so some of what my Jamaican American kids are offering to me not only feels like youthful foolishness when I'm not being the best version of myself. It can feel like youthful foolishness, but it's also feeling like a cultural phenomenon, that's particularly American. And so then I get to wrestle with what does that mean in terms of what I offer? How do I offer what's true to me, even if for the sake of their own differences and cultural space, that's not what they want. And I think that it's all of it is an opportunity to really keep myself growing, because I
Yeah.
want to stay true to me and I want to keep growing
Right.
this entity here. So,
So I want to just pull the veil back a little bit to say, what if? What if we play a game?
sure.
Because I want to hear your authentic voice. I want to know more about the difference between Jamaican culture and US culture as you're experiencing it and raising these children. But if you could say unedited to your children without blowback, what's on your heart to say about your truth versus the American way, what might that look like?
I mean, what I have said,
Oh, good.
what I have said is that the pursuit of autonomy and agency, this like, I'm gonna do it my way. I know my own mind. I will do what I want.
Mhm.
The voices that are saying that and are kind of really encouraging that are doing it in a way that's imbalanced, because it is impossible for you to live well in the world without both giving and receiving care. And so it almost feel I've said it to them that it's you are not in a bubble. You're not in a bubble. You are absolutely always in this system of rights and responsibilities. And you receive just by being in the household with me. You're constantly on the receiving end of all that I offer. And that what you offer into the system is not always going to be based on your individual autonomous choice. It is going to be autonomous, but it's not just going to be, I feel like it, I want to do it today, I don't want to do it tomorrow, because the system doesn't work that way. And when you're constantly receiving and not giving, then what it is like it's like if you're breathing in and not breathing out. It just doesn't work. Right. So I've been part of my own concern at this age, as there are, in American society, everybody talk about individuating and all the thing. Part of my concern is that is it individuating or is it isolating? Because
Yeah.
you only hear the voice that says, follow the true you, not recognizing that none of us are the true us. I am my mother. I
Yeah.
am my grandmother. I am my ancestors. And I am them before I could even form the words, I don't want to be like my mom, right? And so, like, you have to accept the kind of communal collective influence. It's the same as the danger of saying, treat me like an individual. I'm not whatever phobic, whatever race, whatever it is. I am separate from that. Treat me like an individual. I'm like, that's not acknowledging that we are part of that collective that is influencing us all the time. And we give and receive in that collective. So differences between that and what I experienced in Jamaica, that's the same in Jamaica, but in Jamaica, um, parenting was not just relegated to parents. And so this kind of elders offering care and advice, even when you rolled your eyes, even when you didn't take it in, you knew it was there and it was just part of the life. And it wasn't considered bad, it wasn't wrong. There's a way that here it's like, are you being negative? Are you not respecting my thoughts? Are you not? There's a lot of language around what's wrong with what another generation might be saying here. Whereas in Jamaica, it was just, that's just how our elders are. They're this or they're that. And it gives a freedom for each generation just to express. And then you had the resilience to kind of take it in or not. Like, that's just how my grandmother is. I'm going to leave her alone. I won't take that in. But then it lets you take in pearls of wisdom in the storytelling and receive the care that a person is saying, hey, did you eat? Did you drink water? An older and somebody offering you something, and it's not an imposition because you receive it as care. Even when you're like, good grief, don't give me the same food. So there is this kind of allowing people to be themselves, even when the version of themselves is not what you might enjoy.
Right.
That feels different from what's here now, where everybody is critiquing and policing everybody else's self in the name of their own individuality.
And hyper reactive to
Mhm,
being policed
mhm.
or commented about or upon.
I mean, in both
Yeah.
ways, right? So hyper reactive to every difference,
Mhm.
and so there is no both and there is just the this thing is different from me and so it's bad. And I've part of my work in culture development in organizations has been about our moralizing difference. It's just a way that we are. And so when we don't acknowledge that that's what we're doing, instead of making it different, we've made it bad. And because we've made it bad and we want to be good, then we are like, I have to push the bad back. And so as I am with my kids and I'm saying, hey, do dishes, and somebody is saying, hey, you're not respecting my choice or whatever to do the dishes when I want, I am made bad because my intention is different from theirs. And I'm like, we can work on the both and
Mhm.
instead of moralizing difference.
Yeah. And so your children are how old now?
I won't give their ages, but they're in
Yeah.
their 20s.
In their 20s. Okay. All right. And I know that I started to shift in my 30s, but it wasn't until midlife when the clarity of it all started to come and it started to look like, oh, there was a purpose in this package. all along. And part of that reinvention of midlife is so how do I take that, still, switching roles, switching hats? Who was I designed to be, and how does that play in today's world and economy?
Yeah.
You do corporate work with your caregiving, you do consulting. Is that individual as well as businesses?
Yeah, individual, mostly social impact organizations and small businesses. So entities that have, under 50
Yeah.
staff or volunteers or whatever, small entities. But I think as you talk about the clarity in midlife, I feel like disability and chronic illness is a crucible of sorts and can accelerate. And so I did an abrupt shift from engineering to homeschooling into business because I wanted to offer to other mothers what I felt I needed. And the clarity of my own needs, kind of the crisis of the early years of autism, led to my first business, which was to offer training for caregivers in a particular way, as the environment around us was just not offering training. The caregivers that came just didn't understand our kids. And then as I shifted, as my kids got older, then I kept, what do I need? As I got my clarity, it's what do I need and how do I help other people who need that? How do I
Mhm.
offer that? How do I use the skills that I have and help other people who need that? And so right now, mostly nonprofits, but individuals, often women who are in leadership or who are designing or shifting elements of how they work or how they engage with their lives, then we tend to be starting off with the question of how do you belong to yourself? How do you include yourself? As in the organizational space, I'm how do we build cultures of inclusion? But
Mhm.
inclusion does start with our ability to include ourselves. And we're not going to include in other people things that we fundamentally reject in ourselves. And
Mhm.
so one-to-one work tends to be about building work and
Mhm.
building life that really nourishes you. And then how do you widen that circle to include other people?
Well, and as I've watched, I work in corporate spaces too, and as I've watched the progression, the evolution of DEI, for example, that is still a work in progress. And I see that when those companies that were in the check the boxes of DEI back in the day were putting performance ahead of people and saying, I need some diversity on this panel, so I'm going to pull this Black DEI specialist because that gives us the diversity, check the box so I can get that government grant and move
Right.
on.
Right.
But the difference between equity and inclusion, which to me involves a sense of belonging on the person who's been invited to the table. Sure, they're at the table. Do they have a voice at the table? Do they have a part in decision making? Or is it just another place where they have to code shift and pretend they belong, mask up to show up? When you said at the beginning of this, if if work were healthy, done well, we wouldn't have to recover from it and get therapy. And that smacked me. Most therapy I've had in my life has been because of the life work imbalance and conflict of
Right.
trying to lead like a woman and live like a man in corporate spaces.
Right, right. And so I think, I mean, we get the terms, there are lots of terms that we use, and I like to just clarify what I mean when I say a particular word. And so for me, inclusion, and I'm using Claude Steele, a social psychologist, definition or description of it. Inclusion is that feeling of belonging. It's not just being present in space. It is the state of feeling like you belong and feeling grateful that you belong. So it not just that I belong, but I can say, wow, this is amazing that I belong. And feeling that because of that belonging, I can thrive. And
Mhm.
so that tends to kind of cover the, well, have we put, our kind of diversity hire? I hate that even phrase, but we've had the person,
Yeah.
we've checked the box, but their belonging, their inclusion is really about their ability to contribute, the reduction of the barriers to their own contribution. That's what helps them feel like they belong in space and they can thrive. The ability to experience care without having to go all out and advocate for it. That's
Mhm.
what helps people know that they belong. And so there
Mhm.
are signals to our lack of belonging that are just in space. And so, as you described, the woman trying to be in a man's role, like your body is telling you all the time that you don't belong because the signals are all there. And the nervous system load is a constant wear and tear on the body. And so, of course, we're more exhausted, and not to mention invisible labor, one of the features of lack of belonging that I tend to support leaders with. Like it's quite chronic. The once you have multiple marginalized identities, that so all you need to do is add being a woman and then having a chronic illness or caring for people with a chronic illness or whatever it is. Once you
Right.
add in a few of those,
Mhm.
you're spending so much time advocating for your own survival that
Right.
it's exhausting.
Yeah. And so, what are some practical things women can do to give themselves belonging so they can give it to others in an environment like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things I had to do was to own. I believed, like all of the good girls, I believed that if I tried harder, it would be better,
Yeah.
right? And I had to switch to a systemic understanding of the system. I was already engineering, and in engineering, they teach you. I was like, 80%, if you see something going on, a symptom, it's a system, not the person. So
Yep.
don't be going over there to be training this person. It's a system. And
Uh-huh.
so when we are in space saying to women, what here are 5 things you can do to help yourself feel more whatever, what we're not acknowledging is that that's just 20% of the experience this woman is having. 80% is based on the system.
Yeah.
And so the first thing to do is to admit that,
Mhm.
because then you can let yourself off the hook of being lazy, of being not this, of being, all that kind of thing, right? And then the second thing I think is to find the spaces where you belong. So if it is we have to experience belonging in our bodies. And so whether it's specialist groups or special interest groups at work or collections of professional women or whatever it is, like we have to give ourselves this belonging and give ourselves the opportunity to receive care, get our nervous system turned down a little bit so we can ask ourselves, like, what do we really want in the workplace? And
Mhm.
then the question around, how do we lead these people? If you have a team, how do we lead in ways that reflect the belonging we're receiving in other places? But if we're not receiving belonging, and unfortunately, so many of us, our lack of belonging is not just in the workplace. It's often at home. It's often in multiple, whether it's your recreational space or whatever. And so, because it's a systemic issue. So, if we're not experiencing belonging, then it's hard for us to give it. So my first thing is, one, it's systemic. Number two, how do we figure out how to experience it? Other people have to give it to us. For me, I had to start noticing what I needed. And so what are my core needs? What am I craving? And
Mhm.
for me, this combination of the way I was working professionally, plus kids and all the things, I had no core relationships that felt satisfying anymore.
Mhm.
My life felt like it was being led by autism, so there was no autonomy. There was just kind of like being on the clock of those people, and my kids. So no
Yeah.
autonomy, no satisfying relationships. And then one of the other needs that I tend to lean into a lot for, especially women, is competence. No place where I feel like I shine and and feel proud of myself and have other people giving me that feedback. And
Yeah.
so, as we are pursuing belonging just communally, that will hit some of the relational stuff. I had to
Mhm.
ask myself, what are some things I can do to take control, to hold on to autonomy?
Uh-huh.
And for me, that was crafting. I used to say to the people when my kids were little that the yarn obeys me, even
Uh-huh.
when the kids don't. But there are small ways that you can start to give yourself the message of your own autonomy, meet your own needs.
Mhm.
And then as you're doing that, it brings you the capacity and the courage to ask some critical questions about your work. So I redesigned, at that point, I was able to redesign how I was working. So it met my needs better. And I
Mhm.
was already independent contracting. So I was like, became willing to change what I offered, how I offered it, how often I offered it,
Mhm.
who I offered it to,
Mhm.
so that my core needs were being met. So I belonged to the way I was working.
Right. I saw a statistic this week that in the last 3 months, 300,000 Black and brown women have left the workforce by death or divorce, I suppose, by choice or not. That's a significant number. And I wonder what you make of that. Culturally speaking, because we're talking about these don't no sense of belonging and finding up, and it is a systems issue. We are all raised in this country in the same bubble of white is right, and everything else needs to be modified for comfort.
Yeah. I listened to a Malcolm Gladwell podcast some years ago, and I thought it was fascinating. He was talking about segregation. He was talking about before, Black folks it was okay for schools to be integrated. What you had were these pockets of community, schools that were catering to Black children. And even, yeah, maybe they're not, maybe under resourced government wise, whatever, but psychologically, and I've listened to interviews even with people during the time of civil rights movement, the segregated communities, the people inside the communities felt like they belonged to and with each other.
Mhm.
There's a way that the desegregation and this integrated society that we have right now is exposing the hostility of our relationship to difference every single day, every single minute. And it's exhausting on the people who are experiencing it all the time. And so I'm not saying, hey, we should be segregated, but I am saying that regardless of what, I pulled my kids from school and homeschooled because I needed the nervous system break. As a Black woman, with a kid with a disability, my kid is the kid that's going to be told he's aggressive, and that has happened. Whereas his white autistic counterpart has a sensory, dysfunction.
Mhm.
So there is a place for separating and tending to yourself,
Mhm.
and allowing community to hold you, and allowing the people who have the resources to be engaging in broader community to wrap around you and protect you. And so as I see people, and especially women, leaving the workspace, they're not leaving work, but they are leaving the violence of work.
Yeah.
And because women, and particularly Black women, hold so much of the fabric of society, there's so much of the care work, so much of the invisible labor, so much of everything that makes our world work.
Mhm.
Um, they're tending to themselves and getting their nervous system sorted is a gift to the world. It's just that that's not going to be seen that way, but doesn't matter. It's just the same as I say to moms, hey, your self-care is priority over even what's happening with your kid with autism. And it's so hard to take in because of the love for the child, but you must care for yourself. Similarly, in these workspaces, that it's the world will not survive if Black and brown folks don't offer themselves the kind of care that they need. And at certain moments, that means withdrawal. But it
Mhm.
also means the opportunity to create. I often say to people with restorative culture conversations that we need business cases for true restorative culture. And there's something that's happening when people are now looking at indigenous cultures and saying, how did those people do it? But there's a way that inside those cultures, there's just less of the violence from the outside once you get on the inside. And so I think as people withdraw from work, we're going to see more small businesses that are boutique and eclectic,
Mhm.
and that will give us some insights about how to actually do this. Because once you've shut off massa, you've shut off the voices and the violence in some ways, Then you can have access to your wisdom, your innovation, your creativity, and it'll be interesting to see what we create.
Right. When you talked about belonging
Mhm,
and it's something you feel in your body, I'm
mhm,
reminded of so many conversations I've had on this podcast, particularly with Black creators who code shift or code switch. Yeah. So
mhm,
they if there's a white person in the room, it's King's English.
mhm,
And when they go home, is the in their own home behind their own closed door is their moment to exhale, is where they belong and where they don't have to mask up. It is the one place. And unfortunately, as they're in the workplace, and white folk still remain silent in the face of inappropriate comments or tone policing or whatever violence happens in the workplace, that makes it impossible to exhale and belong there because they are an island in this sea of complicity that they
mhm,
can't call out without being called aggressive.
mhm. I think that it's complicated
Mhm.
because when I work with a lot of my clients are white and white women, the this white supremacist ideology harms everyone.
Yeah.
And so um, no one belongs. But some people get the privilege of pretending they belong. But really, it's only the the very top of the hierarchy that belongs.
Mhm.
And so many of the employees that are have difficulty calling it out are also dealing with a ton of shame and perfectionism and a lot of the elements of white supremacist ideology. And so it's, yeah, nobody belongs and nobody's protecting anybody else until we start to kind of have eyes wide open to this thing that's affecting us all and that's kind of poisoning our own systems. Then that gives us the courage to risk. And then I invite people, the especially my clients, as yeah, you have to risk at the level of your privilege. And so, yes, you are not at the top of the hierarchy, but if you speak out and you offer support, the lack of resourcing that you will experience is less than the lack of resourcing that uh,
Yeah.
a BIPOC colleague is going to experience for speaking out. And so often I'm in smaller spaces and as people share issues, it's like, we need a white friend. Who's a white friend? Because it is too risky. You
Yeah.
don't, your needs are not on autopilot in that space. And so we do need the white friend, but paying attention for there's healing needed for everyone. And white
Mhm.
colleagues need to, yes, they need to do their work, but it's not just reading work. It's the heart work and the kind of aligning themselves with their ancestral goodness versus being ashamed of the ancestral violence and then using that power to kind of help themselves move forward.
Mhm. Mhm. And one of the things that white folk don't have is an ancestral connection or history.
Right.
Without going back to our DNA roots and re-examining and deconstructing everything, then we are just mechanical in this system of holding up the hierarchy. When you
Yeah.
talked about when you talked about systems, I absolutely agree, and I tell people it's never a people problem. Rarely a people problem. It is a systems issue. Your systems are broken, or it's a communications issue. And so those are the two things I focus on. And what I focus on with women is finding their voice to use their privilege for good when we have been indoctrinated to be perfect, to be still, be quiet, and don't make waves, or we're going to pay a price.
Right, right. I think that there is the connection to ancestral goodness is difficult in the US
Mhm.
across the board, and yet is so possible. So when a person says to me, I had a colleague who said this to me, she was just so grieved to find out great grandfather was part of moving of indigenous people from their land and so on. And just it was very difficult.
Mhm.
And yet grandma was awesome and cared for people, and like there's a way that we don't have to go very far to find ancestral goodness. And so in the US, because of the, Black folks also have been separated from a lot of their ancestry, and have been doing a lot of work recently just to figure out what that means. And there's a way that, because I'm from the Caribbean, there's a almost been a preservation of some of the ancestry and an identity that many Black Americans have had to form in different ways because of the how anonymous it has felt here. And so I appreciate what you're saying, that a lot of white folks may not have that sense of ancestry. I said, but we don't have to go very far. 2 generations back, speak to grandma, speak to, you know, dad, and anchor into the goodness
Mhm.
and allow that to release you from the shame
Oh, that's so,
and commit to doing something different
yes.
and heal the wounds of grandpa, who was even closer to the wounding than you are right now, by on for the sake of grandma and grandpa, whose goodness you can see, do something different and
Mhm.
kind of create a lineage moving forward.
Mhm. Yeah. It brings up the idea of reparations that makes people's hair stand on end. Okay.
Mm.
And I live a 12-step program. And so for 40 years, I have amends are part of my lifestyle. It's part of what I do. And there is nothing different about reparations that isn't a simple amends. It is a simple, this is what happened. This was my part in it, if I had a part. Here's what I'm going to do differently moving forward. Here's how I can, or to say to the person harmed, how can I make this right?
Right,
That's a
right.
question everybody's afraid to ask because because they are afraid of the answer. How can I do to make this right? Go sell your 40 acres and contribute. And it's like, oh no, I could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if we instead of making it something at scale, I think it's something that has to be addressed at scale. But on the individual level, we all are in relationships
Yes.
that we can kind of, you and your 4 friends, you are all not the same. Yeah, we're the same, but we're all not the same. You don't have the same balance of risk and privilege and power. And
Mhm.
so in that space, be eyes open to that.
Yes.
One of the examples that I keep thinking about is how much debt Black women have, how much debt Black women who then are post 40 have because of the caring for children and all the different things, plus the fact that Black women are among the most educated women. So student loan debt is just massive. And
Yeah.
so retirement and stuff like that is very difficult for Black women. So just that bit of knowledge, if you run an organization, you run a team, or you have a small group of friends, then you can be just asking, how do I balance this out a little bit? Do we, I saw an influencer recently, a couple of her friends just got together and posted in the socials, and their platform was big enough and they did it fast enough. Her $100,000 student loan disappeared in a few days.
Oh my.
And I was just like, how do we lean into mutual aid on behalf of the variation, the people with different power and resource experiences than we do have, just so that the next generation is slightly better off? And that's one of the ways that we can think about reparations, not in the what's the global everybody should get, but just
Right.
this woman in front of me, this person in front of me right now,
Yeah.
what can I offer?
Yeah. Yeah, I liken it to the starfish story where there's a sand full of starfish, and a child is throwing them back into the sea as fast as they can, and an adult comes along and says, "You're never going to save all of them. It's not going to make any difference." And the child picks one up, throws it back in, and says, "Made a difference to that one."
Yep, absolutely.
And that's how I kind of live my life. It's like, okay, in my little sphere of influence, in my four and no more, wherever I am, a little church, a little group, a little anything, where can I add value? Where can I be a voice where someone is voiceless? Where can I stand and say, tell me more about why you said that?
Right.
Instead of standing silent and letting that person navigate on their own and flail,
Hmm.
I can, when my privilege, white
Yeah.
skin, unearned, by the way, has
Right.
nothing to do with DEI,
Right.
can just lift all boats
Right.
by simply finding my voice.
Well, it's lifting me as well. Everybody has privilege. And so, through the lens of our privilege, we are fragile, whatever that privilege is. So, I think about neurodiversity, neurovariance, that as a neurotypical passing person, I
Uh-huh.
have the privilege and therefore the fragility. So, when my kids say something to me about, you're not respecting my voice or whatever they might say, my defensiveness is not just a mother's defensiveness, it's the neurotypical fragility. And
Mm.
so, given that that's the case, there is a, we are all so connected. The moment I work on my fragility and use my power as a person who's neurotypical or neurotypical passing in support of whoever is other and do that bridge building, that person affects another person. And so when we can in humility recognize that, whether it's the 6 degrees of freedom or whatever it is, that my support of that person is absolutely supporting me or mine. As I tell people, I'm kind to people because I have kids. It's going to come back.
Right.
And so, yes, it's me in my small corner, but it is also a humble recognition of how interconnected we all are. And
Mhm.
therefore, my support here and that person's change there and that other person, I have no idea how it comes back to me, but it absolutely does.
Right. The butterfly effect. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. I love your language. I love your language about neurodiverse. What was the word? It's like passing, right?
That's what I said. Yeah, yeah, because I think there is
Ethical.
I came to understand my own mind
Yes.
and my own sensory system as I parented my children. And so I like to your point that there's been a lot of masking for all of us because of the systems of power and the supremacist ideology. And the more we get close to it, we're like, that's really similar to how I think and feel.
Yes.
I just have been able to hide it better than you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And I didn't come to that until my grandchildren started moving through. And all of a sudden, there are things being talked about that didn't exist when I was raising their parents, their
Right.
children. And we didn't know. And when you started this conversation with you've always been a contrary voice, I've
Contrary.
always been the one telling the secrets. All the things my mom never wanted told, I was the first one.
Mhm.
And it is the thread of who I am.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my adults who were raising their adults getting diagnosis and neurodivergent and gender differences and all that happened that they looked to me to say, Mom, in our family,
Right.
I think you have whatever
Right.
it was, or take this test and see if you're on the spectrum, or and it has been an interesting later in life journey to go, wow, I understand when the mask becomes the norm
Right.
and the amount of time I have to take away from people to recover
Right.
is real
Yep.
because of that. And then been able to embrace instead of push off and call it procrastination or judge it or make it be different to fit in, to
Right.
be able to say, and I've attributed in midlife, I have 0 F's to give now, but some of that is because I've always had 0 F's to give. I just didn't know how to navigate in a world like that.
Right, right. A young woman with autism that I had hired in the previous version of my business said that life's been hard. Yeah, autism has made some stuff hard, but most of the hardship is the effect of people's reaction to it. So there is the actual thing, but then there's people's reaction to it, and therefore the work you're doing to moderate the potential reaction, I don't want it, the masking, and all of that extra mediation. And there's such a gift to back to belonging, being able to be your real self, being able to exhale. And then so I have a friend who is autistic and works for herself, but she talked about as as a technical person in the workplace that the sensory overload led to tears. And so she's sitting and she's designing websites and she's just tears. Um, and when she gave herself separate space, she was fine, but that was she was seen as isolated and whatever other
Not a team
language people
player.
not yeah, just aloof and all these things. And so boss said to her, you need to be in the wherever communal area. And so if you want me in a communal area, you have to be okay with the tears. And I just think about, can we actually just listen to what people say about themselves? Can we create space where, yeah, this is what people believe her, that it's
Yeah.
not aloof, that it's not, it's just I need to work in this other space because the sensory stuff was just too much.
Mhm.
Or I'm sitting right here because you say you need me right here. So the tears are just a sign of my body responding to the sensory assault. And I think they should be grateful because if it was my son and the sensory assault, then he'd be running around yelling. So that she is able to be
Right.
in the space and that's the only thing that happens. Yeah, so
Mhm.
it's such a true gift when we're able, regardless of the space, to have space between us and the mask and then
Well,
use it as a tool and take it off when we don't need it.
and when we can come to the understanding that we are all wearing a mask, all of
Absolutely.
us. I remember I did work for a lot of years with highly functioning addicts and alcoholics and families and coworkers and whatever. And I remember when they thought that only the alcoholic was the one with the problem, not the 20 people around them who were
Yeah.
complicit, right? Enabling all
Yeah.
of that because there was something in it for them. And I just completely forgot my thought. So we'll just take that little clip out.
And maybe we will, but I also think when you said that, I always say to people that it's not just a person with autism that needs a therapy. In fact, early intervention, those first 3 years really should be for the family unit because it's not just the complicitness. The dynamic is difficult for everyone. And so the people who are enabling whatever it is, when say toilet training was difficult, yeah, it just is exhausting. And so whatever the enabling is it's about me and my own capacity and my own needs not being met because I don't belong in some other places. And so I don't have resourcing. And so when we think about systems back to, is it this person or is it their whole life? And where do we want to be intervening in terms of support and resourcing?
And I think in this point in time in our country and our world, with all of the shifting sand that we have, I find that it's very important for me to stay focused on the world I want to see, not the world I'm afraid we're going to devolve into.
Yeah.
And when it comes to belonging and inclusion and the workspace and being able to unmask, I know that's where that was going. I worked with somebody 100 years ago who, after 3 years of doing, I worked with codependency as an issue, and I would take people through, particularly women, through all the recovery pieces of that. And this person was picture perfect. She was pigtails and pink all the way through, even though she was 35 years old and had the perfect family and the perfect upbringing and the perfect everything, not a crack in the armor. We went to lunch one day, and I was just about to say, maybe you are the real exception that has no dysfunction in your family. Maybe that's possible. I've never seen it, but it's possible. And just as I was about to say that, her internal dam broke and she felt safe enough to pull back the curtain and tell me the rest of her story. And it's cemented for me forever. There is a story behind every face. We didn't call it masking then, but it's what I say now. The only story that matters is the one you tell yourself. And what happens the gift our children give us in adulthood is reflecting a different story for us to consider
Right, right, right.
for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's what also back to the idea of diversity, that since the world is diverse, and since I use nature a lot to model some of my thinking around some of this work, like biodiversity is life.
Yes.
Neurodiversity is life. And so there are no balanced systems without diversity. If we can have that diversity in our spaces, we get reflections that are not us, that give us some more space. Like that's another way to be. If I don't judge it as bad, I'm like, oh, that's another way to be. That's another thing to eat. That's another thing to like. That's another idea. I tell people that I'm time fluid. Yeah, I grew up in a part of the world where 9 o'clock was maybe 9:15, 9:30, just before 10. Anytime before 10, I'm more or less on time. And I'm in a part of the world now where that might be considered disrespectful. And yet it wasn't necessarily disrespectful, it's just different. And
Yes.
if we can kind of like what we get different things to try on when
Mhm.
we embrace a world, a friend group, a community that is sufficiently different and people don't have to mask, then we can actually see all the colors.
Mhm. Yeah. And what do you think? What's your timeline? Do you think you'll see that in your lifetime?
In pockets.
Yeah.
In pockets. I think I am a big fan of, and I say this to organizational leaders, you have to cultivate the culture you want. Culture will emerge, or you can cultivate it. And so I have seen in spaces where people have cultivated it, beautiful codependence, in not in a way that codependence is negative, just this interdependence. And I honestly will receive from you and I will receive a lot from you, and it's absolutely fine, and it's not judged, and vice versa, and different contributions and shared love. But it has to be in this world, it has to be cultivated. And that means, back to the point you were making, you have to be focused on the world you want. And that world, and not just the big world, but this world inside here at my address. What's that world that I want? And then what do I have? And grieve the difference between the two. And then what's one small thing I can do that can just be a seed into the world I want? And
Right.
can I keep doing that one small thing? And can I keep inviting others into that one small thing? But I have seen it in small pockets, and it's been such a gift and nourishment to my own heart to
Mhm.
then be able to offer it in other spaces.
And every time I've done culture change in organizations, it's all the most effective way always is with small pockets of safety. You'll
Absolutely.
get two or three here and two or three here who grasp the concepts and
Yeah,
begin to practice them on the daily in their
yep,
little space. And
absolutely.
then it can grow from there. And when there's enough groundswell,
Absolutely.
then the upper echelon will pay attention and
Absolutely.
you can begin to shift it.
Yep.
But if you don't, when I do my consulting, I go in and I get the C-suite on board first to let them know what's coming because it's going to be a messy middle,
It does. It's messy.
right? But they have to be bought in at some intellectual, philosophical level to support the shifts so
Mhm.
that those pockets don't get snuffed out like a brush fire because
But
they
the beauty,
will.
yes, but the beautiful thing about who humans are is
Yeah.
that these same pockets that are snuffed out because whether the leadership changed, there was no resourcing, whatever happened,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
These same people got to experience something, and they go into other spaces in other positions of influence, and they carry it on. And so often I am too pretty committed to getting executive leadership on board, but there are so many factors and so much risk associated with executive leaders owning some of this,
Yeah.
that it's a slow road. Meanwhile, two women are sitting down having a coffee, and they figure out a way to include a third person and build a kind of restorative care pocket. And then somebody gets promoted or somebody gets another job, and they carry it over there, and it becomes like pollination. And
Yeah.
so I am like, yes, groundswell is the way to do culture change. And groundswell may not happen visibly in that organization. We just
Right.
need enough people tasting it to be
Mhm.
doing it, to, like you're saying, practicing it on a daily, so that those practices are embodied and they carry it with them wherever they are.
And sometimes they take your very corporate ideas and they can't practice them at work, but they
Right,
can sure practice them at home and their life changes. They can see the fruit of that and they take it to other pockets
right,
that one that where they received it.
right, right. This is the truth. This is a truth. And so it's a humbling work because I mean, yeah, the funders or the stakeholders want to see whatever impact statement or what the numbers shifting in whatever way. But fundamentally, this is an ethical issue. So we must do it for the goodness of it. And we may not see X percentage performance shift, but we will see change in people's lives. And we must keep doing it for the sake of changing people's lives.
So, Faith, this has been a wonderful conversation where I always wrap with asking you two things. First of all, how do people find you? Where can they get more of this? Because you're amazing. And resilience reimagined. And that's our theme for the rest of this season. What is your imagination imagine for resilience that might be different today than it was 5 years ago?
Yeah, I'll start with resilience reimagined. I think that there's a way that we've seen resilience as the ability to do hard things and to keep coming back to doing hard things, and I fully agree with it. But I think especially the people who listen to your podcast are pretty good at doing hard things. We've just had to,
Yeah.
and so there is a kind of invitation into something more juicy and buoyant, and
Mhm.
something that's more nourishing. That is the resilience, so building a system that is able to sustain by being responsive. Our resilience has been hard and sharp-edged and pokey, and if we can actually build ourselves into something that's more luscious and juicy, that means offering ourselves nourishment and care. Can we be steady and intentional about that? Not as a I'm going to live an easy life, because that's not what we're living. But if we were a resilience as a byproduct of intentional need fulfillment and care, that's what I imagine, for so many of us who have been doing hard things because it was necessary, because we didn't belong, because the world wasn't built for us. We had to build those muscles.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's how I reimagine it. And how I can be found, faithclarke.com, email faith@faithclarke.com. I have a little storytelling about what restorative culture could be like. And so it'll be in the show notes, the link to it. But just as a little reflection and conversation to team leaders and to small organizational leaders, I was like, what could you do to shift something right now? And then invitation into conversation, because I love collecting human stories. So if they send me email, I'm like, let's get on Zoom, because I want to hear the story of how you're cultivating and curating culture in your space.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time and your energy and your influence in the world. We love that. You're making such a difference for us.
Thank you so much, Kim, for the space to just express.